to various modern artifacts, such as outboard motors, radios, shotguns, and mobile phones, as being spirits, or as having a kind of spirit essence to them. And I'll return to this issue a bit later on in the talk. So now let's travel 2,000 miles to the east, to my homeland of Australia. So ayahuasca in Australia is largely used by middle-class white Australians who often associate their practice to indigenous traditions of the Amazon and therefore may be understood as a kind of folk vegetalismo tradition. The culture shows many similarities with the Western shamanic tourism boom currently happening on the edge of the Amazon. There's absolutely no anthropological evidence on the use of psychedelics by Aboriginal Australians, aside from the wide use of a tobacco-like psychoactive called pituri. However, Australia is home to a vast cornucopia of DMT-containing acacia trees. For example, Acacia acuminata, which funnily the Australian government or the local council, Shire in Western Australia, is unwittingly propagating DMT by planting Acacia acuminatas all along the side of the highway at the moment. And in an age of prohibition, it's quite ironic. Sorry, I lost my spot. Yeah, and it's these trees, the acacias in Australia, which the Australian ayahuasca groups often use, sometimes with Syrian rue, but mostly with Banisteriopsis carpi, the ayahuasca vine, which is being grown in Australia. And yeah, I'll skip that bit. Right, so my research data on ayahuasca culture in Australia was collected over the last 2 years and consists of participating in around 30 ayahuasca ceremonies with 7 different shamans, or facilitators as they're called in Australia, along with 35 interviews and also 80 in-depth online qualitative questionnaires. While there are centrodiamine and UDV nodes in Australia, my research was focused on the neo-shamanic ayahuasca networks, which include perhaps around 3,000 or 4,000 members. This is a hard number to the population to measure, and the figures are based on emailing lists numbers, but it doesn't account for the DIY, do-it-yourself movement where people are growing their own stuff or buying it off the internet. So the ayahuasca groups in Australia embody various forms of religious or spiritual pluralism, often with links to Eastern religions and Western esotericism found in ritual music and philosophy. So why do people drink ayahuasca in Australia, or what are their intentions to do so? Healing and well-being are the big ones that stand out, and these expressions are often inseparable to expressed religious or spiritual sentiments. The other main response to this question was that of seeking knowledge or wisdom. However, the lines between healing and wisdom are often blurred, as the gaining of knowledge through ayahuasca revelations is regularly associated with a kind of spiritual health. The reported types of illness or malaise people are seeking to heal are most commonly a complex of issues related to stress, anxiety, and depression. Sickness and malaise is often understood by members of the Australian ayahuasca community as resulting from a disconnection of the person from nature and the cosmos, a kind of haunting cosmic individualism perhaps. Participants report that ayahuasca works to heal this malaise by helping to reconnect the person to the world, this sense of reconnection is a central motif of people's ayahuasca experiences, which are often described as blissful moments of unity with the world. Closely associated to these experiences of reconnection are processes of spiritual purification. Illness is often recognized as energetic blocks in the body that are removed through violent processes of expulsion, vomiting, sweating, and purging as a means of spiritually cleansing the person, subsequently reconnecting them to the world. So ayahuasca tends to be understood by Australians as being a female spirit being, often called the mother or la madre. In terms of the phenomenology of ayahuasca rituals, people are having a variety of different experiences, which I've broken down into 3 categories. Most people, most of the time, describe fluctuations in bodily feeling, internal pressure, along with perceiving geometric forms, an acute sense of hearing and other sensory modalities, while associating this to being surrounded by a kind of sentient nature, often spoken about as the spirit of ayahuasca, La Madre Ayahuasca. The next dominant experience in which people is one in which people hear messages spoken to them, giving them advice or counsel, divine counsel. And finally, a smaller proportion, though still quite significant, describe ecstatic flight and complex multi-sensory encounters with worlds and entities or beings, accompanied by synesthetic interactions with these spaces and beings. Now, this is not a complete cartography, but it outlines some of the dominant trends that people discuss in reflection of their ayahuasca trips, journeys, rather. While the notion of cosmological metamorphosis is central in Amazonian traditions, where shamans become jaguars, etc., this type of thing is very rare in Australian ayahuasca circles, where interactions with spirit entities are usually characterized by a separation and connection between the human and the spirit being, not by an immersion or embodiment of the spirit being. I only found a handful of accounts that approximate something similar to the indigenous Amazonian notions of cosmological metamorphosis touched on before. Now, I'm going to finish by taking a somewhat philosophical turn, and through exploring the notion of synesthesia, I'd like to put forth a hypothesis on the nature of cosmological metamorphosis. So, synesthesia is a common trope of psychedelic experiences, not only of ayahuasca and ayahuasca, but also LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, and mescaline, cactus, etc. And it's generally characterized as a kind of union of different senses. For example, people might see sound or feel vision in a tactile embodied sense, or smell light, for example. In general, approximately 3% of humans worldwide experience types of synesthesia without the aid of psychoactive substances. Some common examples include taste or smell being experienced as colours or letters of the alphabet appearing as colours. And some studies suggest that artists are 7 times more likely to be synesthesic, and that synesthesics have a better sense of memory. And of course, indigenous ayahuasca shamans reportedly embody various forms of synesthesia while conducting rituals. For example, claims of singing fragrant songs or patterned songs are not uncommon across the ayahuasca complex of indigenous Amazonia. Now, there have been some interesting developments in consciousness studies in recent years that show synesthetic experiences are not simply a kind of union of the senses, but rather are an embodied experience intimately related to mental or semantic processes, thinking or meaning. For one example, researcher and psychologist Danko Nikolic found that when natural synesthetes who see, for instance, the Latin letter A as red, when they're introduced to the letter A in a new language, a new symbol, once the connection is made that it's A, the new letter turns to red, suggesting a unique relationship between mental or semantic processes and sensual resonance or sensual unity. Therefore, Nikolic and others have put forward the notion of ideasthesia, that ideas colour the sensory worlds of synesthetes. And this notion of ideasthesia, or of a dynamic relationship between semantic functioning, that is the meaning of things, and sensory experiences, offers some inroads to novel understandings of the notion of cosmological metamorphosis, often reported in Amazonian shamanism. When various Yamanawa shamans were asked, how do you contact the spirits or the yoshi, including not just the animal and plant yoshi, but the yoshi of artifacts like motors and mobile phones and stuff, the shamans replied, we first study in detail the thing in order to find its yoshi. We then are given its song. Right? Now, the spirit of outboard motors, for example, are thought to be good for curing headaches, given that the sound or the yoshi of the motor resembles the throb of the headache. Okay, I'll just quickly wrap it up. And furthermore, jaguars are often known as fierce and powerful beings, only accessed by powerful shamans, and other creatures such as turtles or certain insects that make ludic noises or gestures are at times associated to jokes and humor. Rochelle Dolmatov and others have put forward the idea that spirit beings reflect a kind of quality of existence, that is, that the different garments, skins, or barks, the different layers reflect different moods or qualities that are associated, perhaps semantically, with jaguars, anacondas, rivers, etc., and even radios or shotguns. This association of different beings of the cosmos to different layers of existence that can be embodied through ritual activities seems to imply a logical extension of the notion of ideesthesia put forward by Nikolic. So just finally, in response to the question often asked in anthropological circles, do ayahuasca shamans really turn into jaguars? It seems quite clear that the answer is yes. They really do turn into jaguars in a similar way that synesthetes really do experience sound as colours. However, the practices of indigenous Amazonian shamans appear to include deliberate and advanced forms of synesthesia that peak in types of cosmological metamorphosis where shamans may become and embody a variety of dominant qualities of existence that are semantically associated to animals, plants, radios, etc., in order to mediate different forces related to health, among other shamanic activities. And I'll just finish there. Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. We have a few minutes for questions. They'll be followed by some brief announcements, and then there will be the closing remarks over in the large room at 5:30. So if we have any questions, we can get to those now.
Hello, thanks for your talk. Very interesting and opening up new ground, I guess, and that I haven't heard much about what's going on in Australia. Perhaps I missed it, but would you be able to give us any context for the history of how ayahuasca first came to Australia? And
yeah, sure. I omitted that paragraph because of time. Like many creation myths, the emergence of ayahuasca in Australia began with a great being descending from the sky. This being was none other than Terence McKenna flying in from Hawaii in 1996 with a variety of cuttings of the acacia vine, the first to touch Australian soil, or so the legend goes. It's about 96. It wasn't until around 2004 when more structured or semi-public rituals started to emerge. However, it's been proliferating in numbers and groups, particularly over the last few years since then. Yeah. But yeah.
Thanks for your talk and such refreshing accent too. It's more a general open question. Here in this conference we have seen at least, for example, two centers in Peru that work with Shipibos, the Temple of the Way of the Light and Nirihau. The leaders are here present, one of them exposed. And I just wonder if you have any sort of comment on how these Westerners are doing ayahuasca practices and, how they understand Shipibo beliefs and how they seem to translate in a particular way. If you think that they are, really understanding the Shipibo, what kind of translations are they making? This sort of thing, this contrast between this animistic worldview and the way people are experiencing ayahuasca in these settings, contemporary in Peru.
Wow, right, yeah, sure. Well, I'd be these are general claims. It's an incredibly pluralistic subculture, much like the broader culture of Australia, But there's probably a weighted 50-50 divide between, on one hand, people whose worldview